away headless.
So
Hey,
here's the thing, man, is that it's raw. This is what we're all about. We're all about a bunch of crack and we have a bunch of hookers. Are we on?
So we're so live right now.
Luckily, there is your viewers, but hopefully that same make.
I'm just gonna make signs.
You're going to be that guy?
I'm gonna be that crazy old white guy from Around the Horn. What's that guy's name?
Woody Page?
That guy's dope and totally senile.
I haven't watched ESPN in a long time.
Well, that's understandable. You don't have cable, do you?
Cord cutter. But in general, just I don't have time for ESPN. It's TMZ for men. As my buddy Juice called it today, which is so true. It's like sports are soap operas, man.
Well, yeah.
Price approved.
I know that hit me in like a weird spot. You know, sometimes something just like it just like got like up under wherever the laughing happens. It just like kind of hit me in a good spot.
Tickled your funny bone?
It did. It really did.
All right.
That's too funny right there. It's like, oh well. It's I put it on my Facebook for y'all. I forgot to tag y'all in it if y'all want to share or do whatever.
Yeah, there's like one rule, and that's basically it. That's the only rule, is put the other people in it.
Yeah, that's my bad. My bad.
We need to write like a technology brief for you.
Hey, I like how you use brief too. You know, that's very government-esque right there.
I wear briefs.
Yeah, I'm wearing boxer briefs.
Not talking about the same thing. I got some Lululemon boxers. Greatest thing in the entire world.
I actually heard kind of good things about Lululemon, to be honest.
Yeah, it's ridiculously expensive, but I got them from doing some like man yoga testicular cancer thing. It's incredible.
Sounds like a good match. Underwear and testicles.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, you know, it's like, you know,
solid partnership.
They are match made in heaven.
I wonder who the person was that actually invented that. Like, who was the person that say, "Hey, you know, let's go ahead and make sure that these things are going to be tucked away and comfortable."
The first dude who got like his dick zipper.
I thought that had to be created before zippers were created.
Yeah, maybe. Then maybe he was wearing like some like burlap overalls and was like, "Yo, this shit is not awesome." Like I can't do my yard work because I'm shaved.
What's that? Apparently Lloyd is in DC tonight.
Oh god.
Lloyd? That's kind of scary. That's funny.
All about Lloyd.
Is this wedding sometime soon? It's in the spring, isn't it?
I don't know.
Okay.
I get. Hold up. Did he send out invites? Because I'm curious on that.
So you can't talk about this on live TV.
Oh yeah, you're right.
I actually thought you meant Lloyd, the R&B singer. I'm like, why is that news? Why are you telling us? Not even lying. I was like, okay. And like, you going?
Omarion's here too.
People will actually come out and see Omarion though. He could at least he could dance.
Yeah. Are there going to be any B2K reunion tours coming up? Can we get that up?
I hope so.
We'll wait for you to tell us since you got the drop on all the
yeah, you have like Twitter alerts on like Cassidy too.
Whatever happened to him? That sounds kind of funny. Cassidy.
Who knows?
Did he go to jail? I just assume all rappers go to jail when they stop producing rap.
Or sometimes during.
What about who is it? Is it Jaquan that did
Tipsy?
Yeah, everybody in the club getting tipsy.
When he was 16.
Yeah.
Oh well. All right, about to be 6 o'clock. Let's get this show on the road.
Is somebody monitoring the actual thing?
Oh, no, so I'll go ahead. I'll introduce now, and then again, like we talked about. All right. So this is episode 5. We decided to give it a run at another live event. I know a lot of people probably busy getting ready for the pre-Thanksgiving festivities for tonight. But myself, Price, and Timon, this is a subject that actually has popped up within our own group. So it's going to be one that we wanted to be able to talk about, get it in before the holidays. And hey, if you guys feel entitled, go ahead and have a conversation over some turkey, and hope it doesn't get too rowdy for you guys. So the topic today is just on racism. What does it mean? How's it tying with prejudice, and why it matters? And it's going to be a different take on how we've done it kind of in the past. Just based off early discussion between myself, Price, and Timon, there's definitely kind of two camps here on how we see it internally, and so we figured that if in a pretty homogenous group such as ours, if there's already disagreements in terms of what we see as the definitions and how it is relevant, that there's definitely a very good chance that a broader scope of people may have different opinions on what it actually means and how it should be defined and so on and so forth. So I'll just kick it off with my take on racism and prejudice. So for me, there's the distinction between racism and prejudice is, I want to say largely, but mostly kind of based on intent for me. So I feel that everybody has prejudice, just based off your learned environment. Just what you see on TV, what you're exposed to daily. If you grew up in a mostly black community, you might have a different view on police than growing up in a largely white community. Or if you're growing up within a largely Asian community, you might have different views on how black people should be and should act. So I think prejudice is definitely based more on your environment, and it gives you those preconceived notions on how a particular sect of people should be and how you should react to them. For me, racism is inherent isn't the right word, but I definitely feel that it's something that is more or less passed down, through bloodlines or through family, but it's definitely a feeling of superiority. I think it's a more active role in terms of it's a step above prejudice, because it's more active role, and you actually think that a whole race as a whole is better than another race or better than another gender or sexuality. I think that, or excuse me, for race, not xenophobia, not getting there yet. But again, just that a race is above another race, and that when you see somebody, it's automatically a feeling of hate. And that's where I think, for me, racism ties in there. Again, it's just a step above prejudice, where there's a more active role and there's a more hate behind the feeling for that. So with that, I'll go ahead and kick it over to you, Tom, and I know you have differing views on that one, but I think yours is definitely more of a, it may be a more modern look at how racism is.
Yeah, I used to remember, like, dictionaries would have racism written down as like the belief that one race is superior or inferior to others, which is just like, it's almost like a parallel to classism, which inherently with classism, you more think of it that way. But like racism to me is not necessarily just that hate that you're talking about, that like you're inferior to me. That's obviously very racist. But racism can also be like, oh, like you're Asian, you're probably good at math. Like you're black, you're probably a good dancer. Like racism is anytime you hold a belief that someone has a trait or a characteristic solely because of their racial classification. Like, it doesn't really matter if you are saying it as a compliment or an insult. Like if you're assuming something, or you're making a generalization about a group of people based on the stereotype for that race, that's racism. So I had someone tell me the other day, like, this is a classic one. I'm sure we've all been there, the three of us. I think we actually touched on it in episode 1. They were like, hey, you're like a white black guy. And I'm like, okay, You want to elaborate? Like, what makes me a white black guy? Is it because I'm safe?
Like you.
Is it because I'm intelligent? Is it because I'm nerdy? Like, what is it? What are you saying is making me whiter than black? Because last time I checked, I'm a brown black guy. Last time I looked in the mirror, much like all other black guys, we have dark skin, not white skin. So, but yeah, I mean, racism for me is just in general when you are making a generalization about someone based on the color of their skin. Prejudice is sort of the action or the thought that comes from your preconceived notions. Those notions can be rooted in racism. They could also be rooted in like the fact that you were conditioned that way by your environment. Like, you know, if you grew up liking the color green more than blue, that's a prejudice that you have against the particular shades of green and blue that you're going to see in the future. You know, you might look at one and say like, oh, I actually do like this color of blue better, but I'm sort of biased against blue in terms of green. Like prejudice is broader than racism and all the isms, because you kind of have to. Like, prejudice is something that's not necessarily inherently bad. We need to make infer inferences based on what we know. We need to make educated guesses at times in order to not have to evaluate every single opportunity every time. So prejudice, you know, can be good or bad, but when your prejudice is coming from racism, that's where I feel like the two definitions kind of get intertwined and get confused a little bit. But when it comes to the actual attitudes that you have towards certain people, I would call those all racism, regardless of whether they're hateful or not.
So, as oddly, and this will probably never happen again for as long as we do the show, I get to be like the moderate voice of the three of us. So I'm like super uncomfortable and like a little bit weird with
embrace it
with where I'm at. Yeah, I know it's wacky. I'm like, my heart's beating really fast. I'm sweating in my crotch and it's crazy. But yeah, I mean, so I think the one disclaimer that we want to get out there that time and publish is that, like, look, we're not sociologists. We're not scholars on this topic. So this is one that we find really interesting, and then we want to hear from you guys about how you feel about that. I mean, do you feel that if you're out there on the basketball court and someone like looks around and they're like, pick the black dude, I mean, do we consider that racism? Is that worth considering racism? And if it is, from an academic standpoint, we say, okay, that's where we stand on that. But let's take the next step, and this is what we're going to talk about a little bit now, is sort of the social implications of that, right? And so we think about, here's how we define these things, and there's going to be a little push and pull and you know, a little bit of discussion around these more academic definitions. But what's important to us is opening this conversation socially and saying, okay, we have an understanding of what these things mean, but when it comes to social situations, I mean, where do we start to hunt and peck, right? Where do we start to tackle whatever we consider racism or prejudice? So, for example, you know, this person, or you brought up a wedding in our, you know, we had a little chat about, you know, an incident where someone was like, yo, I bet you can dance. Okay, well, is that something that we should feel some kind of way about? You know, and so what I want to get out of you guys is like, okay, Willie, you're saying it's antagonism, really, you know, and it's sort of malicious intent is what puts it in the, you know, in the class of racism. Time, you're saying it's just basically when you ascribe characteristics based on race, right? So let's open this up to like the social spectrum. I mean, like, are you offended by that? Or when someone's like, you're well-spoken, which has happened to all of us, I guarantee it. Are you offended by that? Or are you just kind of like, okay.
I mean, it always matters. Intent always matters, and intonation, you can tell. Like, if they're like, you're well-spoken, like, you're more intelligent than I'm giving you credit, than I would have assumed. Like, clearly that's offensive, because they're assuming that you were going to be unintelligent based on how you look. The dancing thing, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, I am a good dancer, but, you know, like, I don't want people, like, it's already annoying enough, frustrating enough to be judged, like, to be judged unfairly, or, you know, it's obviously better when it's a compliment, but in general, it's just not a good feeling to be judged, especially like because of the color of your skin. So it doesn't necessarily offend me. Like, I am well-spoken. I can do certain things that black people do well, you know, but like in general, I just would prefer you to make your decision based on getting to know me and not assuming things based on how I look.
So I agree in that sense that it's definitely frustrating and it's annoying to be labeled that way. You know, just I guess it's one of those things too, when you look at it, when it's a good assumption, like, oh, hey, get the black kid because he's probably a really good athlete, you're like, well, okay, yeah, right? But when it's
I'm terrible at basketball, by the way. I've always been terrible at basketball, so this is really hurtful. We're discussing.
So it's one of those things where it's just like, well, but it's positive, you're just like, okay, it's not too bad, but especially coming from, being a young black male, a lot of it can be very negative. I think there was that one meme that has it broken off into, like a quadra, like 4 sections, just like what the media thinks we do. And then, there's a bunch of, people, just doing illegal activities. And it's like what my parents think I do, and it's just like you're sitting in the room playing video games, what something else happens and like how we really are. And it's pretty much just, a couple of guys just chopping it up. It's frustrating that that gets portrayed where a lot of people's interaction with black people is, again, what they see in the media. And when you're looking at, mostly white communities or, other ethnicities, more than likely just across the board, you're going to be friends or be associated with more people that look like you. And that's where I think a lot of the, Tyler calls it, racism. I call it prejudice, comes from. The reason why I'm more away from the definition that Timon has in terms of racism is because I still want the word racism to have an effect, a stronger effect. I think if we can put everybody on the racism spectrum, whether it's a little bit racist to a lot of bit racist, just blatant bigot, I think that becomes a slippery slope now where the meaning of being a racist or being labeled a racist is now diminished a bit, where it becomes, people become, I think Price used a term during our talk, desensitized to the word. And so I lean more towards prejudice, not being intertwined necessarily with racism, just because I want the word racism to still mean something, not just be a word that we can just toss around and label, and it's just like, well, everybody's a little bit racist, so it's not really a big deal, right? So that's where I think the big distinction comes from me, where it has to be more of an antagonistic, more of a, of a hate and a feeling of superiority over another race to be labeled that versus, my definition of prejudice, where again, these are just these preconceived notions that are, you're pretty much a product of your environment, and that is how you were more or less, taught to think.
So, yeah, I think it's an interesting point. So, Tom, I'll kick it to you and just segue to say, like, what do you think about that, right? Because we are all, and one of you mentioned it, we all have some sort of prejudice based on a million different things, where we're from, who we grow up, who we hung around with, all these kind of things. And so I'm interested in sort of your rebuttal to this. I mean, if you're, we look, and this is not an indictment on only the white majority. Everybody thinks something about someone when they see them. And it could be as small as, like you said, you see the Asian kid in class and you're like, oh, I bet that dude's smart as shit, or you see the 6'5" black dude and you pick him for your team and it turns out he can't catch and he's actually like a figure skater. And you're like, holy shit. Right. So I guess that was a long-winded question to say, your rebuttal to sort of Willie's statement. I mean, is it sort of socially detrimental with regards to progress to be like, yo, that's fucking racist? Or do people shy away from that? Like, do people say, whoa, I'm not racist, you're overreacting, and then we sort of
we're assuming I'm racist because I'm white. This is always fun, but we'll leave the topic of reverse racism.
That's true.
Another segment.
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Willie. Like, to keep it narrow is to keep it like focused, and you're saying it gives it impact on, because it's like if it keeps a negative connotation, then it's going to be, have more impact. I hear what you're saying, but I disagree, because I think a broader definition that is then classified as negative, like even if you're assuming a positive characteristic about someone, the assumption is dangerous. Like, assumptions can lead you down really bad paths. And I'm not thinking of like a really perfect example for that on the spot, but like, you think about it, it could start out with you assuming something about someone. Like, you could assume that like a white person has a lot of money and they don't, and then they come looking to you for a handout, or not a handout, but they come looking for you for like some help when they really need it. And you are not sympathetic to that white person whatsoever because you assume that all white people have money. The assumption that you made is positive. Right? Like, it's good to have money. So, this white guy's good, but in actuality, he's struggling the same as you. And you assume something based on his race that actually turned out to, in the end, be negative. So like, an assumption an incorrect assumption is negative, regardless of whether it's, you're assuming something that's good or bad about somebody else. And so, like, if someone is assuming something about me, and it's one thing to be like ignorant to the fact that you insulted black people in the process, like the person who called me like a white black guy didn't really understand that she was implying that because I'm smart, I'm white. But like anytime you're making a snap judgment about someone that turns out to be wrong, it could end up being a disaster. So I would say that making the definition of racism, the fact that all, all assumptions based on race are racism, that I feel like that actually gives it more power. Like, and the term racism is like thrown around a lot to Price's comment. Like a lot of people are calling Trump supporters racist. Is enabling racism to exist, is that racism in itself? Or are you an innocent bystander? Like that's a really interesting philosophical question. But in terms of the definition of racism, I see the ability for any assumption, positive or negative, to end up being detrimental. And that's why I include all of that in my definition of racism.
So let me ask this to the. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, so just on that point, then, right? I think I can understand what you're trying to say, right? If you label everybody as at least on some scale a bit of a racist, right? I think the negative connotation of that term, and in its current state, right, as we know it now, in its current state, I think will make people be like, oh shit, like you think I'm a racist, but I think that right now, in the way that it's kind of been thrown around, I think it's acting to be more divisive, right? Than raising awareness to your prejudice. That's why I like the term prejudice. It's.
But wouldn't the same thing, like if you called someone prejudiced, aren't they going to bristle the same way they would bristle if you?
I think they definitely would bristle, right? But I don't think it's as much of a negative, like, oh, hey, whoa, right? I think when you hear prejudice, you're like, all right, that's kind of shitty, but I don't think it's nearly as strong as you're asking, because I still think racist, even in the way that's been thrown around kind of loosely today during this whole election process, right? I do think it still has a strong connotation to it, but I don't think, I don't think prejudice has that same type of reaction, right, where it's going to be as off-putting. But I think that, when you start looking at it again, then once we start getting a little bit more towards the end, we can kind of tie these ones together. But I think that when you can label it as prejudice, I think people are more willing to accept that they are prejudiced than to accept that they're racist. And I think one of the things that we want to be able to try to get out is that we now are looking to be able to be more empathetic or inclusive. And if you're more willing to accept that you're prejudiced, then you can start examining those prejudices going forward. But I think people, when you get labeled as a racist, you're more like, okay, this person's extreme, I don't want to hear that, and then you might stop listening to the conversation. So I think that's the fine line that we're walking, because again, I get your point, I get what you're saying, and I think it can work both ways, but I think people now are so sensitive to the fact of being called or labeled something as negative as racist or homophobic, that if you do that, then people might not listen to the conversation as openly if it's used with a softer term such as prejudice versus racism.
So let's examine that. Let's assume, for the sake of this next 5 minutes, that Timon's definition is right. Let's say that he's right. We're all racist. Now, understanding that, is there some sort of social responsibility to apply that the way Willie says, to say, I get that, but if we go after all these white people and they're like, yo, man, I bet that, that Indian dude's going to be a doctor. And we're like, yo, whoa, racist, calm the fuck down. He's like, no, right? And then we have to have that whole discussion, right? And the guy backs away and he shrinks. He's like, fuck you guys, you're overreacting. Then we got to have that whole conversation. And then all of a sudden we're in this space of just sort of, why do I have to apologize for being white? And we sort of spiral, right? Long story short, is there more progress to be made by, understanding, okay, sure. And we can talk about that, sort of in a smaller group, but to say, look, in order to tackle this, we have to approach it in a different way.
When I say everyone's a little bit racist, like quoting that Avenue Q song, great musical if you haven't seen it. Like everyone's a little bit racist. Just given the state of the world that we grew up in, like we were all sort of kind of in these very culturally homogenous neighborhoods most of the time. Like I'm pretty lucky to live in like Queens might be one of the more diverse neighborhoods in the world, if not the US. And even still then, I was in like a very Indian pocket of Queens, and like a ton of Indian people in that neighborhood probably only interacted with other Indian people, which means that they didn't have exposure to the other races and creeds of people. But anyway, that kid who said that guy was going to be a doctor, there's a difference between being a racist and saying something racist. And this is an important distinction, because if you hear someone say something racist, just don't go and call them a racist. Like that's just like Willie said, that's just going to spiral things downward, and it's just going to turn into like finger pointing, and everyone's going to be upset. But you don't even need to bring up the word racist. And when we get to this level, I think that the difference in semantics between racism and prejudice is irrelevant, because at this point, what you're basically trying to do, regardless of what you call it, is get that person to rethink the assumption that they made. So you don't need to call them a racist. You can just be like, look, listen, I mean, that's a stereotype. There's obviously a cultural emphasis on science and medicine in certain parts of the world, but like, you don't need to assume he's going to be a doctor based on like the color of his skin. India is what, the second most populous country in the world, or something, like it's top 3 or 4. Like there's tons of people who aren't doctors from India also, and you're making an assumption about him for no reason. Like he might not be offended by it, but like, why do you need to do that? The real point is to catch more flies with honey than vinegar, right? Like just calling people names it's not productive, especially if you're assigning labels to them. Like the reason that racism is a problem is no one likes to be labeled. So then you turn around and you call someone else a racist, you're labeling them in return, and that's where that like reverse racism thing starts happening. What you're really trying to do is get them to be mindful, and you can just call it that. You can just say that was a little thoughtless to assume that he was a doctor. Like whatever it is that you call it doesn't matter at that point, as long as you're telling them that they should have thought twice about whether what they said was an appropriate assumption to make or not. So, racism versus prejudice hardly matters at that point.
And I think that ties into what you were saying before too, where you said that, like on a Venn diagram scale,
a lot of overlap.
A lot of overlap.
Rectangles and squares.
And so, again, like I can understand that, and I think when it comes down to those type of semantics, I think that it shouldn't be a roadblock to having the discussion. And I think you do bring a very good point, that is one that we need to be aware and be able to have that type of conversation. But I think it's one of those ones, and it's funny because you kind of see it every day, where people are tentative to call somebody out because of the discord that it might cause. And whether it's in the workplace where you may be the only minority, or it's in the workplace where you hear it among your higher ups, your superiors up the corporate ladder, and you don't want to be able to call them out because you're like, well, this is my job. I'm on the bottom of the food chain. Why should I have it? So it's hard to be able to call it out, but I think it's something that, it starts at a very small level. It starts being able to do it within friends. Obviously, people make jokes like that all the time. I was watching, Trevor Noah from his 2013 stand-up, I think it's called African American, when he first came to the U.S. And he made, multiple jokes like that, talking about Asian drivers, talking about wanting to come to America to be labeled black, right? Like he made so many.
I need a minute soapbox to talk about stand-up comedians.
Yeah.
Right. Stop saying that you can say shit because a comedian said that shit. If you could say it, you would be a comedian. They are comedians because they are good at saying things and making them funny when they're not actually funny. If everything they said was inherently funny, we wouldn't pay them to be comedians. Dave Chappelle's making $20 million per Netflix episode. They're coming out with 3 Netflix episodes. Why? Because he can make racism funny and get people of all colors to laugh at racism. You can't. I forget who was reciting a Louis C.K. Skit on the N-word to me the other day, and I'm sitting there I'm gonna punch you in the face. This is the most racist shit I've ever heard. I'm not enjoying this. You're just calling me nigger right now. What the fuck? it was like the least well delivered like stand up, and the comedians always be like, please stop chopping up my jokes and ruining them at your parties. But like hearing something that was funny and racist is not licensed to go and then
Repeat it everywhere.
Yeah, so I'm sorry I had to put that in there just because like I think actually that white black guy thing stemmed from like a Trevor Noah stand up, and I was just like, okay, well.
I found the trigger. It's okay. Everybody has a trigger. Trevor Noah.
Not the same. Not the same.
It's the same PSA about music, right? Like if you like rap music, that's fine. Me, you two, and Lil Wayne can say like niggers do this. You can't say that, right? And don't say it to me, and don't like mouth it, and don't like side eye me. Like, is he gonna get mad? Because I'm a little heavy right now, and I might all of a sudden just get mad.
Right? And you put me on the spot because everyone else is looking around.
Now I have to make a decision. And I'm going to make the wrong decision for you because, goddamn it, I have a reputation to upkeep. I'm not fucking around anymore.
Now I got to be hard. Now I got to keep the street credit.
Like, God damn it, you did this.
But
it's that same kind of shit, though, right? And it's about, I think that's a good point you made. It's about being mindful. It's like, look, what's your benefit to rapping Bone Thugs, We will open a struggle when niggas do this. And then, like, what? You're like, oh, cool, I did it. I dropped it in there. And now we're just like, dude, like, what? Like, why?
It's like, yeah, what's the end game? There's no positive coming out of that.
Like, am I all of a sudden like, cool, man? Like, now we're even better friends. I'm like, oh, you're like kind of an asshole.
We can debate the N-word another time because I actually slightly disagree when it comes to that. But I mean, for the sake of keeping it on track here, like, I guess we touched on a point that I want to kind of hammer home for folks, especially before Thanksgiving, like. It's counterproductive to just call someone a racist if you know that that's not going to resonate with them. Like if you know you can call them a racist and they'll be like, oh my God, am I really like, I'm super offended and touched and I want to go back and reevaluate everything that I say, then that's great. But more than likely, we're too prideful for that. So rather than calling Cousin Beulah a racist or Uncle Jimmy a homophobe, like you should explain why they're making an assumption that's not correct and that can be potentially harmful, and like that's the tact of having that discussion. It's obviously very difficult. That's why this web series exists. Like if this were easy stuff to talk about, everyone would talk about it and we would have no material, but it's hard to talk about. And so here we are trying to sort of bridge the gap that exists just culturally between people. So you have to understand who it is you're speaking to, what you're explaining to them, how you can explain it to them without getting offended, and how you can appeal to them. That's like a general skill to have anyway. But when it comes to navigating a difficult conversation like racism at the Thanksgiving dinner table, like you really need to make sure that your approach is right. And that's when I like that catch more flies with honey, idiom comes into play. You really need to be careful about bringing it up. And when you bring it up, make sure you bring it up with letting everyone know that your intention is not to label people racists and homophobes and bigots. Like your intention is to really have a discussion and make sure that everyone's mind is right regarding certain types of people, regarding certain, religions, whatever it is. Like make sure everyone is being accepting. You don't have to label it anything.
No, and I definitely agree in that sense too, where when you're having tough conversations like this, and then about prejudice or racism and topics of this nature, xenophobia, homophobia, whatever, you definitely have got to know your audience and who you're speaking with, right? If it's definitely not going to resonate, and actually I think that's what sparked my this discussion a little bit, is because I think time when you had said that everybody's a little bit racist, I was like, whoa, hey. I'm not a racist.
I'm already starting to feel hurt.
Yeah, so I was like, I'm not willing right now to label myself like that.
So sensitive all the time. Why you gotta be so downy soft, Drake? Stop listening to Drake so much.
That's really like fucking classical cello music.
Listen to Bone Thugs. Say the N-word. Can according to Price. So just say it.
Hey, that's my bad. But again, it definitely resonates. Like that's something that you got to be mindful of the audience and how it's going to be taken, right? So you want to make sure that during that whole process that you're looking to make not necessarily friends or enemies, but you just want to make sure you have a productive conversation. Because if you're going to have somebody that you're speaking to completely shut off after 30 seconds, point's done, it's not going to hit home, and then it turns more or less into a waste of time. So I definitely think that, that we really need to be mindful of how we bring this conversation up. But the main goal is always to make sure that you make, yourself and whoever you're speaking with aware of those type of connotations that you label to people, that you address to people. And by doing that, again, it'll go for it starts building a little bit of empathy. You start learning a little bit more about another culture and why that might be offensive. It's not saying that you want everybody walking on eggshells when they're having conversations with different ethnic groups and whatnot, but it's one of those ones where just take a little bit of time to be able to learn about somebody else as you're going into those type of conversations. To say that people don't make jokes about it, would be ignorant. I mean, we're sitting in here in this conversation and we're making jokes kind of about it throughout the whole 35 minutes that we've been on here, right?
Not me.
Right? So like it's recognized, and sometimes there may be a little bit of humor tied to that, but you got to be able to recognize what you're speaking on, right? You got to be able to recognize what you're speaking on, learn about other cultures, and be able to empathize and have that type of conversation, but make it aware. If you never bring it up and never make it come to the forefront that this is an issue, that this needs to be spoken about, this needs to be something that we learn about, in terms of that, the social education about other ethnicities and racial groups and sexualities and everything like that, then we won't progress forward with these type of conversations. So again, the main point that we're trying to drive home is recognize when you do this, don't have knee-jerk reactions. I think the biggest one I remember recently for me was I was walking into a museum and a white woman and her kid are walking back towards me, and as I'm passing, she pulls her kid real tight, like closer to her as I'm walking by. Then this was within the past 6 months, right? So like
Cases in Santa Monica, man.
Yeah, right.
All the time.
And that's how it is, right? It's just like, why are these type of things happening? Don't have that type of knee-jerk reaction, because guess what? I don't care about your little kid. I don't care about you walking out of the museum. I'm walking into a museum. What can I actually be doing? Right? So honestly, each of us can go on stories for days about these type of microaggressions, but we say that for a different day. But again, just raise your social education, be aware of these type of situations, and see if you can start learning a little bit about other groups, going forward. And that way we can open up these type of conversations and be a more unified community as we go forward.
Damn, dude, that was heavy. That was good. I like that shit. So,
sorry, go ahead, Bryce.
No. I'm gonna take a left. So if you got to close this one off, then do that, and then I got another question for you guys.
Yeah, I'll tie on to Willie's, and then you can go after it. But Willie was just talking about like cultural appreciation, basically, and how that's essential to breaking down the stereotypes, regardless of whether you classify them as racist or prejudiced. Like, you can see how inaccurate they are when you actually get to know people that are of that culture, and you start to see the many dimensions that exist within every culture. Like I just saw Moonlight. Plug that movie. You haven't seen that, go see Moonlight. You want to see like a black story that you don't normally hear, like that's a perfect example. It's like this kid from like a really his mom's a junkie, and I'm not gonna go spoil anything, but like it's all about his coming of age story and coming to terms with who he is as a person and how different he is from what you'd expect of a black kid in Miami. And it's like, if you think there's only one kind of black person, you're going to make a negative assumption about them. If you think there's only one kind of anything, there's not. There's very few things that there's only one kind of. We even have white and brown eggs. Like, there's different eggs. So you really can't make an assumption based on just like not knowing. If you need to actually get out there and meet people and see things and learn things for yourself through education, through cultural exposure, in order to defeat those stereotypes. I'll leave it at that.
So, I think Willie made an interesting point about the comedy, and I think we'll probably save that nugget and talk about that at a different time. But that's an interesting point. It comes sort of from a baseline of recognition and respect. And but the one left that I want to take is. So we talk about cultural appreciation, and we talk about, and both of you guys have emphasized, going out of your way to a degree to understand, to learn more about other people, where they come from, what are they all about, what are they like as people, not what are the racial, boxes, that they tick on the rubric. So my question is, where does the responsibility lie? Where does the responsibility lie on the call it the minority versus the majority, or the individual versus call it the representative of a race. So the three of us, right? The three of us, women, married, educated, young black men. There is absolutely no debate in my mind, and if you disagree with me, you're stupid, basically, that if we go out in the street in shorts and a hoodie, we go out in the street in a suit and tie, right, that we're not treated extraordinarily differently. And I'm not just saying that, like, if we look like a homeless person, more people, that's like a social experiment that a lot of people have done, but something as simple as just like shorts and a t-shirt versus, a collared shirt changes our sort of entire reflexive view. So how incumbent it is on us to continue to push that forward to say, well, here's who I am as a young black guy, and I'm bilingual, or I do this and that and the other thing, versus being like, look, here's what I am, and you've got to come meet me, or you're missing out.
So I guess I'll go first, making this quick because we're about 35 minutes or so. But looking at that, I think it's very imperative that I think Tom even brought it up at one point or another within our own personal conversation, is that you, whether you like it or not, you kind of are a representative of whatever group you are a part of, whether you're a woman, whether you're a black male, you're kind of a representative of that group whenever you step out into an arena. And so I think if you can kind of be that person to be able to speak on it, fantastic. I think if you carry yourself in a great way, that's also another way to be, quote unquote ambassador. But I think it's going to be imperative that there's always going to be a meeting in the middle of being able to have those type of conversations, as the representative, but making sure that, when you're speaking with somebody who is in the majority, whether in your workplace or with friends, if you feel comfortable enough, you take that opportunity. I think it ties back into one of the conversations that we had about social activism, do as much as you feel comfortable doing. Right? And I think that's the bottom line for me.
But I want to add the asterisk of, it's a two-way street, and we were talking about the Code Switch editorial piece. NPR there's a show called Code Switch, which actually touches on a lot of stuff that we talk about here, and they're like,
it's not as good. You listen to us instead.
Who should be the ambassador? Just leave, Price. These black guys, I tell you. Who should be the ambassador? And like, there's some people who recognize that they have a ability to change people's perceptions, and if they care about the cause, like we do, I do try to carry myself very professionally in public, and I'm extremely polite, and I'm very well spoken, and I'm very outgoing, and I try and portray myself as being like confident, but also kind and not dangerous. And I do all these things because I know that regardless of whether we try to or not, people are going to judge us. So I don't want to give them a reason. Like, I know exactly what I'm going to do every time a cop comes near me. If he asks me, "Excuse me, sir," I'm just going to drop down to the ground, spread my cheek, and lift my sack, and just wait, just because I'm like, nah. That's an overreaction. But obviously, you'd have to know, you have to be prepared for the fact that people might judge you. And so there's some people who just don't have the time or the patience for that. And I think regardless of what color you are, you don't have an obligation to go out there and try and change people's minds. Like, you should be mindful of the fact that it might end up being, harmful to your cause if you don't represent yourself well. Like, we used to have an abbreviation, WBS, that we used to joke about in college, which was white boy shit. It's like, let's go break those windows for fun. It's white boy shit. obviously white boys aren't the only ones who vandalize things, and that's racist, right? I'm not racist. I'm not racist. But it was just like a stereotype that young college white dudes do really reckless stuff, like for fun, like Project X kind of stuff, like let's burn down the house for this awesome party. And those people are probably just enforcing that stereotype. When black people are really loud on public transportation, they're enforcing that stereotype. Do they have an obligation to be who you think that they like, to dispel your stereotype? No, they don't. But if we really want to bring about sort of unity here, then it's something that maybe if you have the ability to tuck it away and always be mindful of it at least a little bit, it's not going to hurt, and it could actually do a lot of help to just change people's minds. So
my question to both of you then is you sort of got there almost organically, but is there a circular nature to this? So if we're talking about, and this is not about blaming the minority, I'm interested in your opinions on this. If we say, look, because I've heard this before from people that say, look, I mean, isn't a lot of this, aren't they just sort of exaggerated stereotypes? Or when people say, well, they're stereotypes for a reason. Okay, so we say, look, all these black folks are hollering and yelling and talking shit to each other on a subway. And so then, a couple other people get on the subway and want to sit away from all these loud motherfuckers who are always mouthing off and talking a whole bunch of bullshit. So where is that divide, right? So we're saying three things, right? We're saying, look, you're not obligated to dispel stereotypes about your race. We're also saying that we all do things that are inherently sort of, stereotypical of our race, right? Like I'm a good athlete. There's probably some genetic aspect to that, right? Thanks, Mom. One up, but look, we can talk about all that shit later, but we all do things that are stereotypical of our race. We all do. You can't tell me, we all do to some degree, right?
Yeah. I love fried chicken all day.
No, but everybody, sidebar, Southern white person food and black people food is the exact same. You can go to any trailer park anywhere. I don't give a fuck what color you are. All the food will be the same. But
Chinese people, every Chinese food place has bomb fried chicken wings.
Incredible. Everybody can cook in oil. That's a whole different thing. But so, we're doing that. And then we're saying, and then these people are buying into these stereotypes that we are not actively working to break down. Right. So where's the give and take there?
I mean, you're going to have a reaction. Like the way that your mind works, you're going to have an immediate reaction. What humans have is the ability to think about that and decide whether it was correct or not. Like if there's a black dude coming down the street, like your initial reaction was to clutch your purse. Like you're not Pavlov's dogs. It wasn't like that was just something that you were trained to do from behavioral science only. You have the ability to rethink, why did I do that? Like next time, should I not do that? Should I say hello to this person just to let them know that I acknowledge them as more than just like a dangerous criminal? Like there's things that you can do to counterbalance, so to speak. Because like I said at the beginning, we all come from places where we're taught things and we've been taught things along racial lines. That is a byproduct of racism that is going to be really hard to get away from. We're always going to see people as different, or maybe not always, but we always have in America to this point. So it's rooted in hundreds of years of classifying people based on simple characteristics. And regardless of whether they're true or not, it's important to remind yourself to be mindful of whether they are always true or not. Because stereotypes are rooted in sort of fact, quote unquote, but what accuracy? Like there's no threshold for a stereotype. A stereotype is something that's true within 5 and 25% of the time for group of people. No, a stereotype could be true in 0.01% of people, or it could be true in 99% of people. So like, regardless of whether it's a stereotype or not, the real purpose of discussing it is to say, can I get them or myself to rethink the snap decision that I made? Which it could be racist, it could be prejudiced, it could be bigoted, which we didn't really get into, but you guys can look that up, that's different. So like whatever we classify it as, the most important thing is to make sure that we can rethink it and make sure that it doesn't happen again or it doesn't actually end up causing harm or hurting someone.
Willie, what do you think about that?
I think he's pretty much, spot on. So again, I mean, I feel like the biggest point that we're trying to make is that you probably should call it circular, like where is that give and take, where does one end and one begin? I think it's always going to be a case of just reaching out, having these type of conversations. If you're going to be with your boys, you're going to be with your boys, right? You're going to act a certain way. You don't, again, like I said, we don't want you walking on eggshells. If you're going to act a certain way, you're going to act a certain way. But it's just going to be imperative that people don't just take how one group of people that they saw at one time is going to be the baseline for how everybody's going to be. Right. So just kind of open your eyes to that and be aware of how it's going to be, across the board. Just take the time to be able to learn. Everybody is different. Everybody has a story. Everybody has, a pathway that they're on, a place that they're going to. So just take the time to be able to learn and interact. And again, build your social education. Right? Build your social education. Empathize. Learn. But the main thing is just, again, take the time to be able to talk. Reach out to somebody that you may not typically want to speak with. See where they're coming from and see kind of how they live. And that will start opening your eyes up to a different perspective and start breaking, what everybody's circle is, pretty much homogenous. Start breaking that circle a little bit and see how different people might react and what different people are feeling in life. So I think it's a very, very, very important thing to be able to do.
Tom, closing arguments?
Just want to say happy Thanksgiving to you. Two surprisingly well-spoken black males. That's about it. I know we covered everything, and I really do want to bring the focus a little bit back to just like wishing people patience, with their families, because I'm not patient with my family, my friends. I'm thankful. We'll get into that. I'm thankful for the fact that my friends and my family are patient with me, because patience is not a forte of mine, and I'm trying. It's probably partially just my upbringing in New York City and partially like my personality. Like patience is not something that I've ever been very good at. So like wishing people the strength that they need to not strangle their family on tomorrow. I think that's my final thought on this whole thing. Hopefully it doesn't get to that, but if it does, just take the high road.
Willie, what are you thankful for, bro?
Well, about to be with my family, about to be this good grub tomorrow. Obviously, soccer. You guys didn't see this yet today.
Put it out there before Paolo kills you.
So, oh yeah, my fiance, got to put that one out there because, now I'm engaged and stuff. But again, everybody just take the time to enjoy the holidays, be thankful, and just chop it up with friends and family. Have a good time.
Yeah. That's the main thing. I think the boys have covered it all. Whether it's your mom, your dad. Understand your audience. Whether it's your sister's shitty boyfriend. Either way, be conscious of.
Shots fired, right there. Shots fired.
What's that?
Shots fired.
Oh no, they don't mean shit to me. That's not even. We can do a whole episode on that, but just be more considerate. And I think that's the one thing. This is not going to get solved overnight. And it's not going to. It is not going to get solved all in one fell swoop, but it starts with that consideration. And the boys have done a good job of hitting on that. Is it comes from an understanding. And it comes from a lot of the stuff we've talked about in previous episodes that we've hammered home. Is that educate, empathize, engage. And Willie said it a bunch of times, social education. We're not talking about book smarts. We're not talking about degrees. We're not talking about where the fuck you went to school or anything like that. We're talking about how you exist and how you treat and deal and maneuver with other people. And that's vital. So you guys eat yourself into comas. Hope it's enjoyable. And we'll talk soon. Appreciate everybody that watched this live. Watch this, anachronistically. Drop us comments. Hit us up on Facebook. Twitter, Instagram, the email 3blacklives@gmail.com. We're excited to hear from you. Have a wonderful holiday. Be safe, and we'll talk to you soon.